Think the United States and Canada are just friendly neighbors and trading partners? Think again. Right now, they're on the brink of an all-out trade war. And this isn't some distant political spat. It's an economic battle with your job, your business, and the price you pay for everyday goods hanging in the balance. It all started with a stunning move from Washington, a massive tariff on Canadian steel, the very backbone of our intertwined economies. But Canada didn't just take it. Ottawa hit back with a complex and punishing counterattack of its own, a move designed to cripple American exports and shield its own industry. Now, businesses on both sides of the border are trapped in the crossfire, staring down the barrel of financial devastation and mass layoffs. This isn't just about steel anymore. It's about a decades-long partnership being pushed to the absolute edge. And with the critical 2026 review of the entire North American trade deal looming, this conflict is threatening to rip apart one of the most integrated economic relationships in the world. What happens next will define the future of North America. Section 1. The shot heard round North America, the U.S. tariffs. So how did we get here? How did two of the world's closest allies end up in a head-to-head economic conflict that's threatening to blow $1 billion hole in both economies? To understand the explosion, you have to go back to the spark. And that spark was lit in Washington, D.C. It all starts with a dusty, controversial piece of American law, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. It's a powerful tool that lets a U.S. president slap tariffs on imports if they're deemed a threat to national security. Historically, this was meant for genuine threats from hostile nations. But in the charged political climate of 2025, the definition of national security was stretched to its breaking point. The official goal was to protect and revitalize America's steel and aluminum industries from what was called a flood of unfairly priced foreign metal. The argument went that a strong domestic steel industry is crucial for national defense, for building everything from tanks to bridges. So Washington decided to use Section 232 as a sledgehammer to reshape the market. On March 12, 2025, the hammer fell. The U.S. government reinstated a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports from every country. And this time, there were no exemptions for its closest allies. Canada, a partner in NORAD, a fellow G7 member, a country whose soldiers have fought alongside Americans for over a century, was suddenly treated like a threat. For years, Canadian steel had flowed across the border tariff-free, a cornerstone of the deeply integrated North American manufacturing supply chain. The shock in Ottawa and in steel towns across Canada was palpable. This wasn't just a policy adjustment. To many, it felt like a betrayal. The Canadian Prime Minister immediately labeled the tariffs unacceptable, signaling that a response wasn't just likely, but inevitable. But the 25% tariff was just the opening shot. For the next few months, an uneasy quiet settled over the continent. Businesses scrambled, supply contracts were thrown into chaos, and everyone held their breath, wondering what would come next. Then it escalated. In July 2025, the U.S. administration doubled down, jacking up the Section 232 tariff on steel from 25% to a staggering 50%. Let's be crystal clear about what a tariff like that means in the real world. It's a tax on an imported good. A 50% tariff means for every $1 million of Canadian steel a U.S. company buys, it now has to cough up an extra $500,000 in taxes just to get it across the border. Overnight, Canadian steel went from competitive and essential to prohibitively expensive. This wasn't a gentle nudge to buy American. This was a declaration of economic war. The immediate impact was chaos. Companies with long-term contracts for Canadian steel were now facing impossible choices. Eat a crippling new cost that could bankrupt them, break contracts and face lawsuits, or pass the massive price hike on to their customers. For industries like auto manufacturing, where specific grades of Canadian steel are designed into car parts years in advance, there was no easy fix. You can't just swap out a highly specialized steel component like you're changing a light bulb. The supply chain is a complex interwoven machine, and the 50% tariff was like throwing a wrench into its finest gears. The irony? A move meant to protect American jobs instantly put thousands of other American jobs at risk. In construction, automaking, and any business that relied on steel, Washington had fired its shot. Now, the world held its breath, waiting to see how Canada would fire back. Section 2. Canada's brutal counterattack. Washington may have fired the first shot, but Ottawa was determined to have the last word. The Canadian government saw the American tariffs not as a legitimate trade practice, but as an aggressive, unjustified attack on a vital industry. Their response wasn't going to be a simple tit-for-tat. It was a multi-layered strategy designed not just to retaliate, but to inflict targeted pain on the U.S. economy. The first counterpunch landed almost immediately. On March 13, 2025, just one day after the initial U.S. tariffs were announced, Canada unleashed a 25% surtax on a huge list of American goods. We're not talking about just steel. The list was massive, covering an estimated $29.8 billion worth of U.S. products, hitting everything from furniture to clothing. But the real fight was still over steel. While the U.S. used a single blunt instrument, the 50% tariff, Canada's core strategy was far more surgical. It revolved around a tool known as a tariff rate quota, or TRQ. So what exactly is a TRQ? Think of it like this. The government sets a limit, a quota, on the amount of a product that can be imported tariff-free. As long as imports are within that quota, it's business as usual. But the moment that limit is hit, the gate slams shut. Any imports above that quota get hammered with a massive surtax. It's a way to let some trade continue while drawing a hard line in the sand. Canada started rolling out this system on June 27, 2025. Any steel imported above the set quota was hit with a 50% surtax, a direct mirror of the American tariff. The screws were just beginning to tighten. On August 1, 2025, the quotas for many countries were slashed to just 50% of 2024's trade volumes. The gate was now closing much, much faster. And then, just before Christmas, Ottawa dropped a bombshell. On November 26, 2025, the government announced its most dramatic move yet, set to take effect on December 26th. Steel quotas were tightened even further. For countries without a free trade deal with Canada, the quota was slashed to just 20% of 2024 levels. The message was clear: Canada was closing its doors. But the truly explosive part of the announcement was a brand new weapon, a 25% surtax on steel derivatives. This was a game changer. Steel derivatives aren't raw steel beams. They're finished products made from steel, things like doors, windows, fasteners, bridge sections, and even wind towers. And this is where the move got devastatingly clever. First, this 25% tariff applied to imports from all countries, including the United States. So while raw U.S. steel had an exemption from the quota system under the USMCA, finished American products made from steel were now squarely in the crosshairs. Second, and this is the crucial part, the 25% tax was applied to the full value of the product, not just the steel inside it. Imagine an American-made machine worth $100,000 arrives at the border. Even if it only has $20,000 worth of steel in it, the tax isn't on the 20 grand. It's on the full 100,000. That's a $25,000 bill just to get it into the country. This new measure targeted an estimated $10 billion worth of imported goods. It was a strategic masterstroke. It simultaneously protected Canadian manufacturers while inflicting immense pain on their American competitors. It was no longer just a buy Canadian steel policy. It became a buy Canadian everything policy, enforced by a wall of tariffs. Canada's retaliation was complete. The economic battlefield was set, and the casualties were about to mount. Section 3. The impact. Carnage on both sides of the border. This isn't some abstract dispute fought on paper. It's an economic war with real-world consequences. and by the end of 2025, the casualties were piling up in factory towns and boardrooms on both sides of the 49th parallel. Let's start in Canada. The U.S. market wasn't just a market for Canadian steel. For many producers, it was the only market. Before the trade war, an astonishing 95% of Canada's steel exports went to the United States. That wasn't a trading relationship. It was a lifeline. And in the summer of 2025, that lifeline was choked by a 50% tariff. The numbers tell a brutal story. In the wake of the tariffs, imports of key Canadian steel products into the U.S. plummeted. For the human cost, look no further than a company like Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. For over a century, Algoma has been the heart of its community. When the 50% tariff hit, its business model was shattered. The company was plunged into severe financial distress, suffering crippling losses. To survive, it was forced to begin the painful process of winding down its blast furnaces, the very core of its operations. This economic conflict quickly spilled into the courts, with lawsuits breaking out between U.S. and Canadian companies, tearing apart commercial ties built over decades. But don't think for a second this was a one-sided victory for the U.S. The brutal irony of the tariffs was that the American economy was also deeply dependent on Canadian steel. Think about a modern car. It's not built with just any steel. It's built with dozens of highly specialized grades, often developed in partnership between a steel mill and an automaker years in advance. An assembly plant in Ohio might be tooled to use a specific type of steel that only comes from a mill in Ontario. When that steel is suddenly 50% more expensive, the automaker can't just call up a U.S. mill and order a perfect substitute overnight. It doesn't work that way. So, American manufacturers of cars, appliances, and building materials were caught in a vice. They were forced to pay the massive tariffs on Canadian steel they couldn't live without. A business survey in August 2025 painted a grim picture. A majority of companies reported higher expenses and reduced profits. Many had no choice but to pass these costs on to consumers. The price of a new car or a washing machine was now directly tied to this trade war. And then came Canada's retaliation. The 25% surtax on nearly $30 billion of assorted American goods hurt U.S. exporters across the board. But the new 25% tariff on steel derivatives was a dagger aimed at American manufacturing, punishing companies for a tariff they had no control over. The shockwaves didn't stop at the border, they rippled across the globe. In late 2025, Japan's Nippon Steel was forced to cut the profit forecast for its American subsidiary, citing the significant decline and volatility in the U.S. steel market as a direct result of the tariff war. This was a clear signal that the instability was scaring away global investment. In the end, this trade war wasn't creating winners. It was creating a lose-lose scenario, an economic wound that was getting deeper by the day. Section 4. What's next? The 2026 Doomsday Clock. So, where does this all go from here? Both sides are dug in deep. Billions of dollars in trade have been vaporized. Businesses are bleeding, and neither Washington nor Ottawa is backing down. But as the calendar turns to 2026, all eyes are on one critical, looming date, July 2026. This marks the first scheduled joint review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. Think of it as a mandatory 6-year relationship checkup for the entire North American Free Trade Zone. When it was written, it was probably seen as a routine tune-up. But in the shadow of this steel war, it has morphed into a high-stakes, high-pressure showdown. This review is where the steel fight, and a whole lot of other simmering issues, will finally boil over. Under the agreement, the three countries can agree to extend the deal for another 16 years, or they could fail to agree, triggering intense uncertainty. In the most extreme case, a country could signal its intent to withdraw, potentially collapsing the entire framework. Given the toxic climate, a simple, clean extension feels like a fantasy. Instead, the review is becoming a massive bargaining chip. The U.S. will almost certainly use the threat of not renewing the deal as leverage to demand concessions. Washington will want Canada's retaliatory system gone. Canada will refuse until the U.S. removes its 50% tariffs. It's a classic standoff, with the future of continental trade hanging in the balance. Adding more fuel to the fire are a series of smaller deadlines. Temporary orders that gave some relief from Canada's retaliatory tariffs are set to expire. The relief for steel used in general manufacturing expires on January 31st, 2026, with the crucial exemptions for the auto and aerospace sectors expiring on June 30th, 2026. Each of these dates is a mini-crisis waiting to happen, forcing another round of brinksmanship and reminding everyone of the enormous economic cost of this fight. This sets the stage for a tense and unpredictable first half of 2026. Can these two allies, whose economies are as intertwined as any in the world, pull back from the brink? Or will the 2026 review be the moment the North American trade partnership finally fractures? The doomsday clock is ticking. Conclusion and CTA. So, what's the bottom line? We've seen a rapid and brutal escalation. What started as a unilateral American tariff spiraled into a full-blown economic conflict. The U.S. fired the first shot with a 50% tariff, and Canada fired back with a calculated barrage of quotas and surtaxes that blocked not just American steel, but finished products made from it. The result has been economic carnage. This isn't a game played by politicians. It's a crisis devastating real companies and real jobs on both sides of the border. Now, we're standing at a precipice. The entire dispute is hurtling towards the July 2026 review of the USMCA, an event that could either be an off-ramp to de-escalation or the trigger for an even wider collapse of North American trade. This is more than a fight over steel. It's a fundamental test of one of the most successful trading relationships in history. But I want to know what you think. Who will blink first in this high-stakes standoff? Is there any way out of this mess before the USMCA review blows everything up? And more importantly, how is this conflict affecting your industry, your business, or the prices you pay? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This story is far from over. To make sure you don't miss our next update on this exploding trade war, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. And if you found this breakdown informative, please share this video. It's vital for everyone to understand what's really at stake when the foundations of North American trade begin to crack.